Greetings, everyone. After a long hiatus, I'm back. And it feels really good to be back. It is currently January 2025, and it's been almost a whole year since the publication of the previous episode with Beth Huggins. I'm really reinvigorated to come back to the podcast after this long break because I just needed time to sit with all the things that were going on in my life. It didn't put out the fire completely. I've always had the flames burning in a small little embers. I've kept them deep in my heart, in my being, and despite all the challenges, I was able to eventually hop over them and overcome them, and here I am. I still feel not just the interest, but really the passion that I have for storytelling to bring out these wonderful life stories of these amazing humans I get to call friends. Some for a few months, some for a few years, some for over a decade. And so today, I'm just over the moon excited to bring about a new episode 4 of the Wilderness Within podcast with Tamara Wilder. We crossed paths in 2021, not long after the wedding of Mariana and Orion. They're two of the first guests of this podcast. To give a little context, Tamara is an ancient living skills teacher and has been doing it since she was 19. And some 30 years later, she's rocking it, writing books, hosting workshops, teaching young ones, adults, all over California, Oregon, and across the US. And I got to be on her land and experience what it's like to live off-grid and really in tune with the elements and all that the land that she dwells on has to offer. I think more than the conversation itself, I enjoyed the friendship that we hold. And I really enjoyed having someone who's older and has had experience living the way that she does, which is, a method that I'd like to get to myself. Something that's really harmonious, really in tune with the seasons and the elements. Not be extractive, but be really regenerative in the way that I utilize the water and the soil, the plants and the animals and the climate, all the microclimates that's there. Yeah, this conversation was recorded in September 2023, which was just about a month before I packed up my bags and moved myself to Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I have been since October that same year. And more than simply the way that she lives, I am just so enamored by her principles in which she shows up for her community, being a space holder for ancient skills and the revitalization and spread of these ancient technologies she holds so close to her heart. And I got to film for her at one of the workshops that she's mentioned at a school in Northern California. I really love how she draws connections to our ancestors' past and how longer than any human period in history, those are the techniques, technologies, methods, and ways in which we've lived in families, villages, and tribes to get valuable resources from the land and apply it to make clothing, to make shelter, to know what to harvest, to eat, know what parts of the plants to extract and prepare. It's the foundation of human society and existence. So it always reminds me how invaluable and timeless these teachings are and how underrated it is to have elders and wisdom keepers as herself to continue these traditions for young ones and other adults who are keen to pick this up. In a recent collaboration with a local organization named Rekindle here in Otatahi, Christchurch, they're following a really similar principle, which is to take basket weaving and wood carving and other time-tested and honed crafts of using natural materials, offering workshops to the public. So I don't think it's a coincidence that these teachers and knowledge holders have been in my life for a number of years now, and these are all techniques that I really want to learn myself as the months and years go by. Love to hear your thoughts and feedback afterwards, whether as a comment on the podcast or directly to me at Wilderness Within Pod on Instagram. So without further ado, I bring you a conversation with Tamara Wilder. Enjoy. I want For us to begin by acknowledging where we are, maybe tell us a little bit about this land and its history and maybe what it means to you at this moment.
Oh, this piece of property. I think this piece of property means more to me than at any other time that I've been living here, probably now, because I've been here so present for a good 3 years or more, I guess, at this point. But this 40 acres of this plot of land in Mendocino County is referred to as Turkey Song, is what we call it, sort of hearkening to the turkeys that gobble and call like regularly during certain seasons. So they're definitely here. And pretty unique and beautiful spot. It's at the edges of a lot of things. Like we're on a ridge that is one of the dividing lines between the Russian River drainage and the Big River drainage. So the drainage that goes to the coast is just over the ridge. We can walk up and look out at that drainage at sunsets and see the ocean and everything. But our vantage from this property, which is just to the east of that ridge, is looking out towards the east, and we're looking at the Russian River drainage out towards the town of Ukiah. And so just all the different edge characteristics that are happening because of that make it a really special place. You know, the river fog comes in and cools us off during the summer months, and then ocean fog comes in and cools us off, and sometimes they mix, and sometimes we're in like a little sunny area right in the middle. And so it makes the weather here really nice and less hot than further inland, and less cold as if we were further towards the coast. But we can feel that we're that close to the coast. The ocean is really only about 30 miles as a crow flies away from here. Right. And so it takes an hour to drive a very windy road. But if we walk up to the ridge, any water that's running from that ridge down is the headwaters of the Big River. Yes. And the road that takes us to the coast is going along the Big River for the most of it. And when you finally do hit the coast, you're at the mouth of the Big River. Yeah. So I feel really connected to that Big River drainage now more than ever before.
I remember 2 years ago, we took a walk up to that ridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were looking at the Big River.
At the edge of the state park.
Yeah.
And there's actually, I guess, an unofficial way to get into the state park. And it was a really clear day, so we're able to see that we're at one of the high points in this whole greater coastal range.
Yeah.
And you could see the marine layer that's in the distance. Yeah, it's very dynamic.
And sometimes that marine layer is that marine layer is right at your feet, like when it rolls in and you can see it rolling. And when the marine layer is rolling in, when the fog's rolling in, it lets you really distinguish the canyons, which are hard to do with the fog there. Yeah. So when the fog's coming in, we can really see where the river canyons are, and it's pretty magical that way. Yeah. And so we're at that edge, with the river drainages and that as well, but then we're also at the edges of all of these different things. Like we're near the edge of one of the state parks, Montgomery Woods State Park, and then we're also the property boundaries. On the other side, a lot of lumber company land. So it's a really amazing location, really, and we just feel like it's a pretty magical spot for a lot of reasons.
Can you talk into the original connection you have with this land and maybe just talk a little bit about what you've built here?
I travel a lot, teaching and traveling a lot and exploring lots of different places, and somehow really ended up loving Mendocino County. It kept drawing me back in multiple different ways, and my parents ended up moving to the county, and then it was just, it felt like the county was sort of my home after having left Los Angeles right after high school. Yeah. And really sort of moving around then and not really finding a place that felt like home. And then Mendocino County just kept becoming my home. Right. And so once I started living here more full time, I was just sort of caretaking for people and renting sometimes, and really wanting to find a base, but not feeling like Mendocino County was really going to work. It was going to be too expensive. And I felt like I was probably going to have to move up to Humboldt County to find a property that was more in my range of affordability. Yeah. And then through a really amazing personal connection with a friend of a friend, came into knowing about this place and developed a really good relationship with the owner, who's our friend Chuck, who we're buying it from. And he just really wanted us here and made it possible, essentially. And so the terms and the support and everything of being here, it just felt like it was something that I wouldn't have been able to find it was a very unique thing, and it really, it's made the whole thing possible.
I think I remember hearing you share a story in the earlier months when we were meeting, and kind of sensing that the story kind of goes in which Chuck has had this land, but may not be in the physical shape and the health condition to be able to build it up the way that he had envisioned it.
Potentially something like that. He's an elderly man at this point. He's in his mid-80s. But he came into the land in the late 60s.
Oh, it's been that long.
Yeah, oh yeah. And he got this property. This property, the 40 acres, is a subdivided part out of a 160-acre piece. And he was dating, or his girlfriend at the time, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, was part of the one of the things she did was she bought a large portion of this ranch that was being subdivided, and then she personally subdivided it out to a lot of the neighbors. And she was somebody that was from Marin, and this was one of the things that she did. And at that time when they were dating, he came up and there was a little sheep shed on the portion that she decided to keep, which is the adjoining 80 acres to our place, part of that original 160. And he came up and made that a livable space for her, and didn't have anything to do with all the subdividing. She was doing that, but he was the one that was making it into a place that they could be. Gotcha. And so after, like, in exchange for that, she ended up giving him this 40 acres, which she considered to be, it's sort of off the hill. It's down a little dirt road. She considered, oh, well, I'm never going to use that part. So she gave him that 40 acres as payment, or as an exchange for all of his work. Which way back in the late 60s, it was a pretty small amount of money, really. Yeah. And so
land values were very different back then.
Very different back then.
And also there wasn't as much of a draw yet for people to leave the urban environment, like San Francisco Bay Area.
This was a lot further out then.
It was really far out for then. And then the roads weren't as built up, the freeway system weren't as put in yet quite then. And tell the average person, like, oh, I'm going to drive 3.5 hours north and way into the bush to live, is like, kind of uncommon.
That wouldn't really fly, or it wasn't really attractive. So it was a different world back then. There was a big back to land movement. Yes. And and people, and then we're very close to this community that some people may have heard of called Greenfield Ranch, which was a very big intentional community that was getting set up at the same time. Yeah. And that was really where the core population of hippie back to the landers were coming, was to Greenfield. And then a sort of interesting thing is, one of my mentors and colleagues over bow making, he's a guy that takes on new things. His name's Tim Baker. He takes on new things and sort of tears them apart. He's just got this really analytical brain. I didn't realize until I'd been living here for many years that he was one of the original brain ideas behind the Greenfield Ranch, his whole thing was like, let's make a sustainable community. It's a community system, but we want to make it where it's going to live and continue and not fall apart as people lose interest. And Greenfield Ranch is now in its third generation of ownership. And it has worked. They did a whole thing. They made it a corporation, and there's a whole legal thing. And they made it where it wasn't that people had to sacrifice personal ownership to be part of a community. So they sort of mixed the two needs, like the need of modern people to actually have ownership over something and still maintain a communal existence.
We take the prevalent system of land ownership, which, maybe we don't open the can of worms around that, but also this more community-oriented, decentralized system that I've seen quite a few intentional communities try to do, but some of them fall short over time, especially as maybe the older generation of founders kind of pass away, and there's a lack of younger generation coming in to uphold it and to maintain it, because it is a lot of labor hours and a lot of communication and meetings, and also deciding responsibilities.
And ways of transferring ownership is huge. In normal communal situations, that's always, I've seen it become a problem so many times. Right. For looking towards a future of generational, of what's going to happen with the kids in many communities, the kids of the people that are the original, they actually don't have any ownership, and they've grown up there, but how do they become so that's it. There's always we're in our Western world, in my mind, the way that we live, there is this thing about ownership that gets in the way in a lot of communal things. And so that was what Tim Baker did, was this one idea of how to work around it. And it's not that it's absolutely perfect or anything, but that community is still going strong. And, and the kids and the grandkids of some of the original people, some of them are still there, and some of the people were able to sell out to other people that are loving living there. So
Right.
It was just a funny aside that one of my friends that I already knew was involved in that way back in the 70s when Chuck was moving up here.
Yeah.
And so he had acquired this through his work.
Yeah.
And he never really intended to build a lot out here. He always used it as a place to come and be out, and he's more focused on wild plants and vernal pools.
Gotcha.
There's rare grasses up here. He has a house in Ukiah, and so he just wanted to be able to have a place to come.
It's like a little close retreat, really.
Yeah.
It was never going to be like built up the way that
It wasn't that he wasn't envisioning it getting built up, but he was never envisioning that he would build it up.
Yeah. When you two met and it became clear that, you were looking for a place that's maybe not as far north as Humboldt, Del Norte County,
Right,
but a place in which you can home base out of and run your program, your business, and a lot of which does need to be like closer to like public schools and other settings in which you can
Which is the
teach
reason to
skills.
not be living further north, because of so much of my work is in Sonoma County in the Bay Area.
Yep. So this has actually become a like far off enough, but not too far.
Exactly. It's a perfect little. It's actually that way. It's really not that far from Ukiah, but you feel like you're really far.
Leaving town, coming here, every time I'm like, oh, I'm going through a portal.
Yeah.
Driving up that mountain road and seeing the rolling hills. And most of the year it is like this golden brown silhouette along with the oak trees and some of the, of course, redwoods and
lots of fur too.
Yeah, you quickly, you lose signal on whatever carrier you are, and then you're like, okay, I guess I'm here. It really, even to this day in 2023, puts you in the mindset of I'm present. I can't be checking social media. Text messages aren't going to be coming through unless, if you have a local Wi-Fi network. But for the most part, it's like it really gets you to look around your environment, the scenery, and observing the changes, seeing what wildlife, insects, birds, and animals come through, which is something that you do very often. You're watching the land, you're looking for medicinal, edible delights from the land. And that was one of the things I remember when we met in Sebastopol in Sonoma County. I was like, oh, like these people forages, they hunt, and they make a lot of their own stuff. Like, okay, who are they and what are they about?
Right, yeah, who are these people? Yeah, and that's been the vision for this place for sure from the beginning. And that's one of the reasons Chuck wanted us to be involved. So at the time when we met him, he had had this place for several decades and had been using it as his little excursion spot, his little retreat spot. He was getting close to retiring and was pretty much feeling like he needed to move this property on to somebody else, and that was pretty much going to be his retirement. Was his vision. Like, I'm going to find somebody that wants to work within my vision for the place, and he had all these different things that he wanted to see happening. But then he was also looking at the reality of like, I need to have some retirement because I'm going to be stopping working and I don't have, and so that's pretty much me buying this place from him has been his retirement all these years. So for the last 10 years, like the money I'm giving him is directly letting him live, and that feels really good.
Yeah, it feels very symbiotic.
Yeah. And then he's stayed really involved, and that was part of the deal with all the agreements around the land. Like, part of it is that he wanted to stay involved in the land because he's very attached to it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So,
Well, he's had 50, 60-year history at this point. And so that's a long-term relationship that, I imagine runs very deep, and it's could be very emotional, and especially seeing what you all are building, and now you're bringing your nephew here onto the land to be learning from you, the two of you, and also building himself. It's got to have this feeling of like, yeah, you may not be biological family, but in a way there's this feeling of continuation and community that may feel like just like a family.
Oh, it does in a way. I mean, and he doesn't have any family in this area. He lived here with his mom, but she passed around 20 years ago, I guess now. Right. or 15 years, something like that. She passed after we started doing this relationship with him. But the rest of his family is in Southern California. And so,
which you can relate to as well.
Yeah. So we're sort of, although all of mine is up here now, but they used to be. And so that's part of the relationship is, we check in with him in town. He gives us a town base. Like if something needs to get delivered that can't get brought up here, we can have it shipped to his house. And,
I love it.
So there's a lot of good symbiotic stuff going on there. Yeah. And then we have this joke is we tell him whenever something cool is happening up here. Yeah. And, usually about what we call Chuck 30 is when he arrives, which is usually about not for the core part of the day, but he shows up with ice and cold beer or cold drinks or something for whoever's here doing everything.
He's more than your cheerleader, that's for sure.
Yeah. He's been a great part of the whole project.
What a wonderful, just wonderful support. Of course, there is money being exchanged. The way I see it is if we're gonna play the game of economics, let it be a game where both parties are benefiting, and it's not just about the monetary addition, subtraction, and there's more reciprocity beyond just the monetary figures.
Absolutely.
I find it to be so beautiful.
Yeah, and then but helping out monetarily, because really trying to take high interest out of the equation is huge.
That's right.
And so so that's been a big part of what's made this possible. And because since he didn't have a big physical amount of money invested, he didn't feel the need to be charging interest on it, because it wasn't like a loan was having to get taken out, so it's all it's just sort of existing material.
I think the
things.
Banking as we know it today has taken the heart out of maybe one of the original reasons why I set up for it. It's we've made it sometimes pretty predatory.
Oh, absolutely,
and it really marginalized the people who already are not filled with resources. Yeah. But one thing I do want to shift back to is, you're here, we're here in 2023, and this is the status of the land. And I love, again, getting more of the gaps filled so that I know the fuller picture and I appreciate the ongoing relationship you have with Chuck.
Yeah, definitely. He's been a big part of the whole picture the whole time.
Yeah. So thank you, Chuck. One thing that really stood out to me as I was reading this chapter in this beautiful book, which you showed us last night, which is titled When Women Gather. I believe this is the very first print that just came out maybe 2 months ago or so.
Yeah.
And the subtitle is A Decade with Spirit Weavers. And you were wonderfully tasked with the writing of this chapter called Skillshare. And what caught my eye in the first page was not only your beautiful description starting out with the element of fire and how we as a species and for a very long time have been creating and gathering around fire, and how incredibly useful and how deep it runs to our core. And you dig a little bit into your upbringing and kind of being turned on, so to speak, to a type of art that you called, quote, functional art. I find it to be just so fitting because it really is art. The things that we utilize and purchase and admire very regularly, a lot of it truly is craft. And craft is really art. Using our hands, using our knowledge, usually passed down from a close family member, a friend, a mentor, and creating something that we use and need and really helps us on a daily basis. And of course, that is the premise of your business and also your craft in different ways of so many decades. I wanted you to, in your own words, talk a little about growing up in LA, which is something that we do share, but of course different generations, but nonetheless that kind of big city energy, but yet you found the solace, the curiosities, and the interest in being crafty at a younger age, and how that led you to really moving out of the region and starting a very different path. And so I'd love for you to talk into maybe some standout stories and moments of revelation, maybe when just whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, standout stories from that time. I mean, like I mentioned in the Skillshare chapter, I have to give a lot of credit to my parents for that part of my life. So even though we were living in suburban Los Angeles, my parents both were already very crafty themselves. My dad's a woodworker, he did all his own mechanics, like he over the years at our house in Chatsworth and in the San Fernando Valley, he ended up like adding on a big second story. So my dad is a very, very capable guy that can use his hands like
crafty.
Crazy, very crafty, and not in craft like small little crafty
Sure.
things, but he's very capable. He's skilled, and he's also a pilot, and he maintains his own planes and everything, and so
Wonderful.
that was always his. That was his true calling in life, and then he was a policeman for his job, but like that was just what he did. But he also hunted and fished, and so even though I was in Los Angeles, I still had that connection, and so we would go out camping quite often, and so I was out. It wasn't a city life in LA, and we were in suburban Los Angeles where we had
on the outskirts, really Chatsworth.
Really on the outskirts. Then, like when we bought our subdivision, it was there were horse ranches around us. I grew up riding horses, but by the time I graduated from high school, all of that was gone, and it was just suburban sprawl.
In that 10, 20 years, it really shifted.
Yeah, I watched it happen. Yeah.
But you got to live the life as if you were in a much more rural setting, but that no longer exists. And
we could walk.
You caught like the last kind of tailwind, right?
Yeah, and we live really close to the Santa Susana Pass Mountains, which are the Rocky Hills near Chatsworth, and we could walk up there, and there was a park that is still there, although it's just pretty hard hit right now, but it was growing up. I was really watching the shift. So my parents are really huge, and then my mom was a preschool teacher, and very crafty in that in herself too, like in a different way. And so I grew up just sort of using my hands all the time, and just always having that idea that you can always figure out how to do it, and that really came from my parents and my family. And I was a little bit weird in the community. We were the only people in the entire neighborhood that didn't have air conditioning. Instead we had a pool, and my dad set up a big fan, and we would pull the cold air in at night, so it was just, we had chickens, we had eggs, and my mom had a huge garden in the backyard. And so we weren't living exactly like most of the other people in the neighborhood were living. Yeah. And so we canned food, so I grew up like knowing how to do a lot of things. But I guess the biggest memories are just always trying to do things, and very often just trying to figure things out without asking how to do things. And so learning by trial and error are some of my biggest memories.
It sounds like an important aspect, which seems so simple even when we say it, is this can-do attitude.
Right.
Have, sounds like the logical kind of figuring out brain from your dad, and then the discipline that he has, right? And then your mom, being a preschool teacher back in the day, had the patience and having the simple languages to explain things. And so being surrounded that, perhaps growing up, you were put in a position where it's you were inquisitive, and then you were able to figure things out.
Oh yeah.
And that's that is to me, I've just realizing this well into my 30s, what an incredible foundation to build upon anything, to just be inquisitive and figure things out on your own.
Right. And just having an idea that, because I think if you're as a kid, if you never see people do things for themselves, you just don't think that's something that people do. Mm-hmm. If everything you see in your world is people going and buying things at a store, they have to hire somebody to do everything in their life, which is what a lot of the modern life is, especially in the United States, is if something needs fixing, you hire somebody. If something needs cleaning, you hire somebody. If something, It's
outsourced.
It's outsourced. Everything's outsourced, and people actually don't know how to do anything. And if you grow up watching that, you just think that's what life is about, but I didn't grow up that way. Everybody in my world always, it wasn't that we never hired people. At the beginning, it was for lack of money. We had very little money at the beginning, but it was just that we just did things because we wanted to. Yep. And then the really funny thing is my dad always told me that I helped him do his own car work, and he always did all of his own car work. Yeah. And he always told me that he wasn't going to let me get my license until I could take apart a car completely and put it back together. But right when I was turning 16, when I was learning how to drive, that was right when he started making a little bit more money. And he started hiring out all of his car work because he stopped doing it. And so then he's like, oh, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And we're just going to hire somebody to do that now.
But that is an important memory, right?
Yeah,
you remember him saying that, you're going, oh, shoot.
I'm going to have to take apart a car and put it back together before, yeah. So it's funny stuff like that. But yeah, so I think that's the core thing. And for me, the biggest one of the biggest memories, I guess, or one of the sort of tragedies, or one of the things of what got me into the thing is I was very into the arts. I had transferred, I'd gone to private school for different reasons in grade school and junior high school. And then I ended up being back in public school, but I ended up back in a magnet school. And then finally for part of junior high, and then back at high school, public high school. And so because of my whole history, I was pretty far ahead of a lot of the other people in my class. So I had the luxury of taking a lot of electives in senior and junior and senior year.
More.
And so I took photography, I took painting, I took any art thing that I could do. And that was all, and I loved those kinds of things. And I took languages. Those were my passions, right?
Yeah,
so I had a lot of electives.
Italian and Russian.
But in high school I took German and French and Spanish always. So and then in high school is when I got my chance to go to Italy for the first time through different things. But the biggest thing is that I knew I wanted to do that craft stuff. I mean, I knew I wanted to do art. A lot of my friends were artists, and we were all really into this sort of artsy, punk rock scene thing in LA in the 80s. When I went to go to school, this was all pre-internet, you got to remember. I wanted to go north. I knew I wanted to leave LA, and I found somebody gave me an old flyer there wasn't an internet to go on, and so you got the big brochures from the schools. Yes. And I got the one from UC Santa Cruz, and I was looking at it going, wow, they've got this amazing craft program. There's all these studios, there's all this stuff. And then my friends, went to other ones, and one of my best friends, Todd, he ended up looking at Sonoma State. It was like, whoa, look at this craft program, right? And so he ended up going to Sonoma State. I ended up going to Santa Cruz. And it wasn't until I got to the dorm.
Which is wild because you applied, got in completely. And this entire time you did not know that the
craft program had been disbanded. So they just had torn the whole thing out. I mean, they didn't tear it all out, but they just stopped all of the programming. So there was nothing about blacksmith, there was nothing about jewelry, there was nothing about pottery. That whole program had been taken away. Which
you were ultra excited about.
Which is why I wanted to go. Yeah. And so they had a really terrific fine art program, but not the craft program. But then at the time, I had just gone to Italy 2 times right before I went to college, and I was really fascinated I really wanted to learn Italian, because my French had helped me when I was in Italy quite a bit, but I really wanted to learn Italian, and so I just shifted gears. I loved being in Santa Cruz. I mean, that was sort of, I was young. It wasn't that this was my only path, but it was a thing that had drawn me there, but then I'm like, well, I love it here, so I'm just going to switch to languages. And so I really quickly realized that I had become such a minimalist that I was never a fine art thing wasn't gonna work with me. I wasn't gonna be making big paintings and stuff.
I really like what you wrote in here, which is the differentiation between fine arts and craft arts. And it's no offense to the fine arts, but I think the thing that stood out to me was I didn't want to create pieces that's going to be hung in a gallery that's just going to be admired and maybe sold at some point. But you want something that was very functional, that was useful in life, and could provide value for yourself and others.
Right.
That's a huge distinguishing factor for me.
Oh, absolutely.
And that really resonated with me.
Yeah, because before I went to college at home, at high school, I was painting my bicycle. I was painting pots and vases, and I wasn't painting something flat. I by the time I got into college, I wasn't ever envisioning living in a place big enough to have a place to hang a painting, to paint something like that, Right. I remember going to the big, and that was a big thing of my early, because I did take a couple fine art classes at the beginning at UC Santa Cruz, and that was the biggest things a lot of the instructors and the teachers were talking about, is finding space to do their art in was always a challenge.
Yeah.
Just finding a place that had big walls for making these huge paintings, or even for sculpture, Yeah. And so, and I was just realizing that I was going to become a minimalist. So I just switched, and I became a language major, and I just put all of the art stuff on hold. It wasn't that I stopped, but it was just, I was like, that's just not going to be my course of study. Yeah. And so I started doing Italian language and culture and phonetics and linguistics, and it was all super fascinating. Yep. And I loved it. It was great. And then I went on my exchange to Italy as my 3rd year for that whole thing. But right before I went on my exchange is when I got exposed to the ancestral skills. And that was where it was really, when I look back, I see that I hadn't realized how much doing the art had been lacking in my life. And I still would do things at home, but it was having it be a focus. And I still was with a bunch of art majors in our household, and it was like we still were doing fun things all the time. Yeah, like we were always. It wasn't that it was lacking, but it was just that when I went to my first skills gathering, it was just like everybody was doing exactly what I'd always dreamed art would be. So it was a really technical craft, but incredibly gorgeous, and like really, and everybody was so skilled, and everything was so beautiful, and everything was functional. Like it was like we were all making things to wear or to decorate ourselves with, or put in our houses, or cook with, or eat out of, And so that was when I really felt like this is actually my calling. Like finding that
reignited a fire. It's like you took a detour because it quenched your curiosities, and of course it served you very well. And you even got to go to Italy for a while.
Right. Yeah.
But you kind of came back around.
Yeah. And then even by like getting exposed to that before I went on my exchange, made me appreciate things in Italy so much more than I ever had before. Because I wasn't this. It's not just the primitive skills or the ancestral skills. When I say primitive, I don't mean anything pejorative. I mean like the core first beginning skills. That's what the word actually means. People don't use it anymore because it is a very charged derogatory term in general, but it comes from the root word prime, which, is first, essential, and best. So it's like it's the core of everything. So I like to say that over and over. Yes. So when I do say the word primitive, I am not using it derogatorily, but I do avoid it because it is a very charged word. Unfortunately, it's been used against Indigenous people, like in a really, really hard way that makes it difficult for them to release the charge around that word. And so it's not a word to be used lightly.
Thank you for clarifying that.
But the ancestral skills. So ancestral is a little bit less charged of a word, or the word paleo is less charged of a word. It just means ancient.
And some people think of the diet.
Right. Immediately they go to the paleo diet, but paleo just means ancient. That's what it means. And so the ancestral skills are, it's not just things that Indigenous people do. And that's what the Skillshare chapter actually is about. And we run into that at Spirit Weavers, where, we have our ancestral skills village, which is where we're doing the more Indigenous-based skills, the more like super earth-connected skills, the oldest skills. When I say Indigenous, also I mean Indigenous cultures have been the ones who have been doing these specific crafts the most recently.
And upholding it.
But everyone has lineages in these things. Like, because it goes back to hunter. When I say Indigenous, I mean like hunter-gatherer, like oriented stuff, right? And so, it's a mix there. So it's those ancestral skills, the hunter-gatherer skills, are the level that we're usually doing in the ancestral skills village. But then there's the more modern versions of all of those, like it's like a tree, it's growing out, and there's the things that have come out of like making string is one of the hunter-gatherer ways of doing something, but weaving cloth is later, like it's something that's more modern, and so not that much more modern, but still like more modern, and so that's where. It isn't that the skill sharing is just the old stuff. It's just that the core stuff is the oldest. It's the foundation of it all. And so everything that has come since then is more modern, and it's just as important. It's just as valid. People have their own ways of learning these things and their own lineages. But that's where trying to distinguish where it's like these are just the hunter-gatherer versions of these things, which means they're the oldest.
So that is one of the core premise of this gathering.
No, that's the thing about the other skills gatherings, just the core premise of them.
Thank you.
But Spirit Weavers isn't. And so we have our little ancestral skills village, which is women from our ancestral skills
within the gathering,
within the bigger gathering.
I'm more clear now.
So that's one of the reasons I wrote the Skillshare chapter, is because it's a question that comes up quite often, where we're in our little ancestral skills village and we're teaching string making, we're teaching tanning hides, we're teaching basketry, we're teaching sort of versions of the more oldest skills.
Yes.
But then around us are women that are teaching more modern levels, and it's not that their skill sharing isn't as important or as even.
Of course.
But the reason they're not with us is because we're just doing the oldest stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's the delineation.
You travel through time by visiting different pockets and villages within the gathering.
Right, and so there are skill shares happening all over Spirit Weavers, but the oldest ones tend to be in our little.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to speak into, drop some names of first teachers, early inspirations, and people who've really helped you along the path.
Yeah, so the person who took me to my first skills gathering was my ex-partner, Stephen Edholm, and who also was involved in this property from the very beginning, and is still a big part of everything. So he's definitely one of my main inspiration, or my main first contact people, who he taught me a lot, and we figured a lot out together in our early years, because we met when I was 19 and he was 21, I believe.
Yeah.
So, it was like...
And you co-authored this book that
And we
we're looking at.
co-authored Buckskin, The Ancient Art of Brain Tanning, and we co-authored a series of handbooks. So we have So You Have a Dead Animal. We have Sustainable Harvest, about ways of sustainably, with good intention, harvesting wild things. And then we have a sharpening handbook, and we have... Oh, there's several more that I'm forgetting about right now, but it's a whole series of handbooks.
Truly, what a jump start! Yeah, you were 19 at the time, and that was a big exposure. Yeah, you were. Yeah. I can kind of see it, right? Like you meeting Stephen that third year in Santa Cruz, where that was
second year.
Where you were really reignited to functional art. And so, yeah, who else along the way?
Right, and so then we met, and he took me to my first skills gathering, and at that gathering I met one of my main teachers and like really good friends, is Margaret Mathewson. And she really is like my main mentor in so many ways. And she's an amazing human being that has is a PhD in a lot of different studies, and is very really heavy in she understands and knows native basketry in North America. She got hired by the Smithsonian Museum in New York to identify their basketry collection. Wow. So she just has she has this professor knowledge, but she's one of our skills people, and she's just she's super amazing in so many different ways.
Talk about walking different worlds, right? To be at that level of PhD status and working with the Smithsonian, and also showing up to these gatherings where you're on the ground weaving together.
And while she was studying at Berkeley or Cal and getting her master's and then her PhD, she was spending her weekends or her vacations studying with Jim Riggs, who was one of her main teachers, and going to, and he's the one that wrote the foreword to the book and became one of my main teachers as well, or one of my main inspirations. Actually didn't take a class from him ever, which is the funny thing. I never took a class from her ever either. And I never took a class from Melvin Beatty, one of my other tanning inspirations either. But it was just all through working together, doing things.
I think that's the beautiful, It's like the skill share and transfer could happen without formally taking a class or lesson, but yet the igniting each other's fires and continuing to, blow air onto it and add fuel happens nonetheless.
It totally does. And my relationship with Jim Riggs and with Mel Beatty, it was around being at events together and just spending time. So it was more like the village gathering, right? But with Margaret, it was really probably the closest that I could get in this modern world to a real traditional intern position or mentor position, where it was basically we didn't have a car and we wanted to go to the skills gatherings, and so Stephen and I would ride our bikes up to Berkeley and from Santa Cruz, and then we would get in her car, Berkeley, and then we would get in her car and she would drive us to events, and we did that for years. And on the way, we took a long time getting there, and she always had gatherings, harvesting of materials to do, because she knew her routes. She'd been doing this for years, and she had people to visit, and so we were really just sort of her helpers. Yeah. And it turned into a real, more of and that's how I learned. I never took a class from her, but what I was doing was helping her gather and process materials. And then if she was doing a little teaching thing on the way, we would help her teach. And so it just turned in, and then we started helping her teach in Santa Cruz, and and so that it just sort of all morphed into everything. And so the formal education isn't there, but that's more how it actually probably used to be done more.
Well, I kind of even question the word formal and informal learning at this point, because I think the way a lot of us define it now is in a classroom setting, in a lecture hall, or something of that sort, or even for a lot of people on their screens.
Yeah, or just where the teacher is there intending to teach you.
Right.
Like, has
but
a plan.
I really, if we look at a longer time scale, and I'm sure, you can relate with me on this, it's like, well, the learning, whether we put a label of formal and informal on it, has been ongoing, and it's closer to what you were doing, Margaret, where you accompany the person and you like shadow them and you watch and you listen and then you assist, right? Like a lot of the more like direct, hands-on approach.
Yeah, definitely.
It's wonderful.
And so that was great. And so she still is like, if I have a question about something, I still call her and like, and she's still a really good friend of mine. And so
how many years later now?
Oh, this is a long time ago now. Later.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So
it's like a lifelong teacher, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And she's in a generation between Jim Riggs's generation, she's like 10 years older than me, and Jim's like 20, and so or 20 to 25, and so she's like in that 10 to 12 years older. Yeah. So it's a nice span. Yeah. So she's definitely one of my main people. Like, just can't even.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret, for everything. And then Jim, being her teacher, and also through spending a lot of time with her, subsequently spending a lot of time with him, he is just one of the main people. And he passed away several years ago, so he's no longer with us. But his daughter comes to some of our events, and so there's continuity there. And she was sort of our daughter at the camps all the time because she grew up in the camps. And so
takes a village.
Yeah, and she's still a crafty person. She's a jewelry maker, so she went and got, she knows, she does silversmithing, and she incorporates now her jewelry background, her formal training, with natural things and everything she learned from her dad, which is all in her brain because she was raised steeped in it. She'll say she doesn't know anything, but she knows
fully
so
marinated.
Much. Yeah, she was fully marinated. And so it's really sweet to see the generations come through. But then the people that organized the original gatherings, like he organized the original Glass Butte gathering, which was really the first one that I went to before I went to Italy. It was a very informal one out in Eastern Oregon around flint knapping, but also doing tons of different things. And then when I got back, while I was in Italy, Stephen went to the first one that he'd attended of the rabbit stick gathering, which was the first one of like the more sort of formal ancestral skills gatherings that happen all over the country now, was those rabbit sticks. And he didn't go to the original one, but he went to the first one that was sort of open to a lot of people. I think it was the third one. And before it had just been sort of teachers getting together. And Margaret took him to that one while I was in Italy. And so when I got back from Italy, and he got really turned on and like met the community of people, because through that event, all these people that were practicing skills isolated and not knowing about each other, because this is pre-internet.
That's right.
Like, the only thing you knew was published books and magazine articles.
Published books, maybe phone calls and letters.
Magazine articles and letters, right? Like, and most of the people didn't have good phones, like, because they were living out in the bush somewhere.
Exactly.
And so, it was... we didn't have cell phones, right? So you had to have a landline to have a phone. And so we had voicemails, and we had we had voicemail boxes that we could call. And, so it's like, those first gatherings, which were like in 87, 88, I think, they caused an ignition in my mind of like the community coming together, everybody finding each other. And that has just continued over the years as more people find out about it. But those first couple were really amazing because it was where everybody was finding each other. Like now somebody new will come into the event and they'll be blown away. But that was when we all were being simultaneously blown away because we all were finding each other. It's a collective,
it's really a collective sparkle, right? Isn't it? Like, and I'm so glad you bring this up, that the technology and communication was nowhere near what we have access to today, even for the average person. And so the intentionality it takes and how present people would be when they're at these gatherings is, I would say, a notch higher. Oh,
it was completely different because we would spend a week together, and we would literally we were all talking so fast with each other. We were all sharing everything.
I was so excited.
Whoa. And then we'd take what we learned that week and we'd take it home and deal with it for like a year. And then pretty soon, it was within a year or two that then there was another gathering 6 months later in Arizona, the winter count gathering. And so and then other ones started popping up. So the time between started shortening. But at the beginning, it was like a whole year. We'd all come back and And everybody would have been playing with all the little things that they'd picked up from friends. And then a year later, we'd bring our stuff back, what we'd been doing, like just learning how to not make string by hand twisting and learning how to leg roll, which is another technique. It was hard to find the information unless you were somebody who had somebody to learn from directly. But for somebody who was coming from a more modern existence and trying to learn old stuff without having a lineage or a continuity to it, and without finding teachers. So Margaret found Jim, and Jim had teachers. And so those were the people that were coming to the event that could then pass it on to other people.
When I was younger, I used to kind of roll my eyes and not at all understand, and of course skip through the credits and acknowledgments when movies and TV shows or podcasts, and the host talks about oh, we gotta thank this person and this person. It just goes on and on and on. I never really understood it. And I think in the last few years alone, I've really come around and realized, my goodness, even the smaller projects like this require a whole team. They really require and really benefit from a whole community around it. And so I'm here to proudly acknowledge the humans through the years since the launch of my Patreon in 2018 who have been contributing or contributed in the past, acknowledged all that they've done. The time they've given to give me comments and dropping messages, giving me advice, and of course, dropping in their hard-earned dollars or whatever currency they're earning in to support me and all the projects that I've devoted my time to, including the Wilderness Within podcast. Thank you so much, you all. It really means a lot for your support, past, present, future. You make my dreams come true. You allow me to work where I travel to. You allow me to trust that each month I'm going to have this nice little baseline of income that really sustains me, that sometimes really puts food on a table and allows me to go, hey, I can commit to this project. I'm going to buy that piece of gear. I'm going to hire that person. I'm going to invest in myself, in the services and goods that allow me to create and expand and try new things and experiment. And all of this is a part of it. So grateful for your support. It was the one core event where in my head, the analogy I'm thinking of is the one big rain event where you have to collect as much rainwater as you possibly can, and then you slowly sip it.
Exactly.
And you remember it, right? But now it's it's almost a little too easy, but then the differentiation of lineages, and I think there's too much distraction now. That's the irony. We've gone from it barely existed and people still found each other to now there's all these other distractions and things that I could be doing as well. And then how do you still find focus? Right.
There is that, and there's also, and I think in a lot of ways it's all I think people are gaining knowledge and skill much more quickly now, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, I agree.
People can just they can get into something and delve because they can find any information they need. Where before, the level that you exceeded and found out about things was totally limited by finding the resources.
Yeah.
So, there could be a resource there that knew it, but it'd take you 3 months to make the communication or see them or, and so now it's not that all detrimental.
Absolutely. I see it as a good thing.
The way that, and people are excelling at certain crafts, incredibly quickly. Yeah. But I think the downside is that it comes a little too easy. So people don't have to work for it as much as we did in the old days. So maybe it isn't valued by those people quite as highly because they can excel so quickly because they can find access to so many good teachers. They can find access to such good information at their fingertips. Right. Then, it's almost like they don't value it quite as much. Sometimes they do.
Interesting. Then maybe this is actually a good segue. Could you speak into how modern technology such as the internet and smartphones and devices has been helpful and also maybe a little bit detrimental to your craft and business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's...
for example, you and I have been able to work together to film one of your classes up in the Eureka area.
Right.
And that would have been extremely difficult just 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. It wouldn't have come out nearly as good, for sure. Yeah.
And now you're able to distribute that kind of information visually with sound and good quality out to like anybody, and it doesn't really cost you anything because it's already created and it can be replicated, copied and pasted, right? And so maybe speaking to some of the ways.
It's like it's up on YouTube, so people can get the link and they can watch it. It has been an interesting thing. So the pluses I'll go to first.
Please.
Are that what I've been seeing is that even for me personally here, and especially like me wanting to be on the land more, but then also being forced to by COVID, like, taking all of my traveling plans away and my work away for a year or so, and making me do things online, is that you can be doing stuff and being on the land and then still reaching out and communicating and sharing without having to personally travel and be on the road. So in the old days, in order to go to these events, you had to physically go there, and it's a long trip, and it would take several weeks, right? And there was an adventure in that, and there's a whole thing. And then as the number of gatherings has increased, and until COVID, I pretty much was just on the road going to gatherings. And if that was what I was depending on, I was just always on the road. I wasn't staying at home. And the ability to teach online and to distribute things online and to have a website, it all makes it where you can live more in a remote thing and be doing the craft that you want, and still be teaching and able to serve and able to get the information out. Because that was one thing that early on, from the first couple gatherings, there was a group of us who included the one person that's continued this sort of dream, Lings Filden, who just published her book Return, because she's the one that ended up taking our dream and putting it into a model for business and teaching workshops in Stone Age excursions, like using only stone tools. But we had a dream. There were a bunch of us, and we were going to go do a Stone Age year experiment where we were all going to go out and spend a year living with just stone tools. And we were envisioning 8 to 10 people finding a piece of property. We were going to be doing, it was this whole vision that we had. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, it ended up being that people just sort of lived isolated, and some people went and lived up in Alaska. Some people went and lived in out in Montana. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing for me was the reason that I didn't end up doing that is we moved to Montana and Idaho a few times, and tried to live in these more remote locations, is that being from California in the Bay Area and having been taking over Margaret's workshops, or she was needing somebody to take over her workshops, she was going to move out of the area, and being invited, and basically having trouble making a living and then getting invited to teach in the Bay Area, always getting drawn back to the Bay Area. That's right. Sort of having to make that choice of okay, do we live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle where we're very removed from the modern society, where we really are isolated from family, we're not traveling, we're not doing that because that's where we can be really sedentary, or in order to teach these skills and stay connected to family, do we sort of live this life with our feet in both worlds, basically, of traveling all the time? Because when you travel to teach workshops, you're on the road, you're traveling.
I get it.
Once you're coming into the modern world, you're no longer 100% in the old world, I
get it.
And so because people were so interested, and from such a young age, Stephen and I were both getting invited to teach. People were super excited because, unlike a lot of the other people at the gatherings, we were doing it full time. A lot of the other people at the gatherings were older. They already had their work, they already had their thing, and they were either the skills were part of their work, like they were anthropologists or archaeologists or worked at museums or something, or their skills were their hobby and they had their office job and they did this on their side. And so
it's a different mindset, for sure.
It's a different mindset, and also a different speed with which you explore things. And so Stephen and I were doing it 24/7, living in the backwoods, and so we excelled really quickly at a very young age. And so by the time we were 24, in the community of going to these events, people thought we were elders, and they were like, "Oh, you guys are so skilled with this," but we had just been developing it. But it was all we'd been doing.
It's accelerated because you live and breathe it every day.
Right.
Versus part-time.
Right, exactly. And so that was one of the things that distinguished us. And so and we weren't the only people. There were other young people doing the same thing, but there was a sort of a new generation like us.
Yeah. And the technology aided that, right? Because
the technology, then it wasn't so much that back then there really wasn't much technology, but there were that was pre-cell phone, that was easy video. Uh-huh. Yeah. But at the beginning, it was more making that choice. It was to teach, are we going to pull out of that and live a more modern life, really?
Yeah.
And so that was really the biggest shift for us was the realizing that to make a living, we were tanning hides to make a living, and then teaching was like, and that's a lot of tanning to make a living, tanning hides.
It's because I'm trying to steer us back to the pros and cons.
Yeah, the pros and cons, exactly.
Gotcha.
But like, yeah, like so there was a lot of doing that, and then yeah, please steer me because I will go off on tangents.
I got you.
But making that choice to start teaching, which was a lot less physically demanding on the body than making a living 100% crafting,
right,
or 100% producing hides and craft, because that's like, it's always been part of my existence, but I realized really early on I didn't want to do that 100%.
Yeah.
And even doing that is like craft shows where you had to do it, just being on the road, it just pulls you away. And so that's one of the biggest benefits that I see for everybody, is people are more able to be in their world, doing their thing, staying in touch with each other, and then picking which gatherings they want to go to, and a few events a year. And whereas, before you had to be either one or the other. Like either you were doing your own thing or you were always on the road.
Which still holds true today. Because there are, no matter what hobby or interest group or what have you, there are folks like yourselves, you and Stephen back in the day, where you lived and breathed it all the time, or like a high majority of time. And then there are folks who are like really like the weekend warriors and the hobbyists who are like, oh, when I have an hour each week, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'll do this, yeah.
And I think that, well, you can tell it accelerated your growth, and you were able to explore your curiosities all the time.
Right.
And you were able to pick up skill sets across the spectrum. And when you're at these gatherings, then you're able to soak up even more and also get new ideas and pass it on. So it's like you were part of the reason from the 80s, 90s and on that these gatherings became more frequent. It sounds like they became more vibrant, and maybe also like it coincided with the technological boom.
Oh, absolutely. And then people like able to be making videos of what they were doing, and then people getting to the gatherings already having known, like, followed somebody else. And like, and so it's like, it just makes it faster, so there isn't the big time. And those are the big pros, is that people can stay connected more. Like the connectivity is huge. Like the transfer of information, even if it's not physically in person. And I see that as one of the biggest benefits of all the interconnectedness is people can put their stuff out there and put it on a video, and then tons of people watch it and learn from it, and they don't even know who they're teaching. Those are definitely like some of the biggest positives. And a lot of people like to talk about negatives. Yeah. And honestly, besides just the negatives of the internet itself, like of the effect on the natural world, and of, like the effect of our Wi-Fi, the 4G and the 5G, like, and the technology and all the resources that go into creating all of these devices, like putting that aside as a negative, because that whole thing is a very big negative. If you're just moving into the effect that this technology has had on our lives and on our what we're doing in teaching, I don't see huge negatives.
Yeah, I mean, the one you mentioned earlier was the fact that it's just a lot of distraction, and it's really easy to be drowned out in a sea of noise.
Right. There's those kinds of things, and then the biggest. Yeah, it's when it's being used. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used badly, and it can be used for well. When it's being used badly, there's a lot of problems. Like,
then we can't really blame the tool. Actually.
We can't really blame the tool on that. It's our own use of it, and so.
And it's our own discipline.
It is our own discipline, but like the algorithms that run social media, those can be super detrimental. Yeah. So somebody who really has very little skill or very little knowledge, if they just know how to work the social media thing, they can become they can blow up, and everybody thinks they're everything. Which then is a game of marketing. Right, it's a game of marketing, and so that's where it can be hard and challenging for somebody who's looking for a good teacher or looking for true, real information. I see. To find what's actually real information.
It's important that you make that. Yeah, right. You point that out, because I find that to be true in my world, and I didn't really wake up to the notion that there's a lot of false information out there until well into my 20s. It wasn't really. It must have been a few classes when I was in college where professors you can't cite random websites because we're going to dock you points for it. And we're all like, why?
Because that's information.
Because it's like anyone that can put up a website, which is anybody with a few dollars, can write out and make it seem like their opinion is valid and it's factual, and it's not, right?
And you can't cite this in like an actual study paper. You gotta find.
So thanks, university education. You helped me jumpstart on one of the bigger realizations that's going to hold true, and it's becoming more important now that we're able to filter out the noise.
Absolutely, and so that's where one of the detriments is that it's a challenge that I face myself in trying to put the information out there that's very valid. Is it takes so much time to get it out there and to get the following to actually make it like show up, because you have to get enough views to even be in the algorithms to get in the search engines, right?
Yeah, we're all kind of in a way fighting for the few seconds on stage, for the spotlight, even if it's momentary. And it's like, oh, I'll get whatever viewership I will.
Right. And so I don't use YouTube that way. Eventually everyone keeps telling me I need to, but I don't want to spend the energy creating a channel and everything.
It's not where your heart's at, right?
No. And so my YouTube videos, I have a few of them on there because you have to have a public space. And a few of yours have been edited into short public ones.
I love that.
But the majority of my videos on YouTube are private links. And so they're just for students and people that are given the link.
The way you're using it, I think it's beautiful and wonderful. I love to kind of transition into the space where you talk about your experience teaching young kids and teenagers, and like just how gratifying it is.
It is.
So I love to dive into that.
I do want to mention a few. We talked about the gatherings really quick, and I'll make it really quick. Is the skills gatherings that we've been talking to. David Westcott is the person that first organized the rabbit stick gathering. And then he's the one that started doing the winter count as well. And that's one that winter count was sort of one of the inspirations for the Spear Weavers gathering. And then those two gatherings had been getting mimicked, or there are some East Coast gatherings that were happening at the same time by other people. And then pretty much all of the other ones that have happened since then have been sort of offshoots or inspired. The people in organizing those have been inspired by one of these like 4 gatherings, and so, he's huge in the whole thing, and then there's big parts of like core people from that event. It was Stephen Watts, who is no longer with us, Steve Watts, and then David Holliday is huge in those, so he's another one of my mentors. And John and Jerry McPherson were a really big deal way back in the day. Jerry McPherson just passed away, so and then Melvin Beatty. That's where I met Melvin Beatty, who was one of my big inspirations for tanning. So there's like an endless list. I'm not, because I don't mention people's names, I'm not saying that they were,
Yeah, let it be known. And definitely,
there's a lot of people.
Acknowledge the people that have gotten us to where we are.
Yeah.
And it's important to do that.
Yeah. And so there's a list. I mean, at these events, there's between 80 and 100 instructors, and between 350 and 650 people, or 750 people.
That's amazing.
And so it's you can't just like name a few names and get everybody.
No. Especially when we're talking about ancestral skills and transfer, it's like we're talking like multi-generational. There's just endless if we really trace it back, huh? But yeah, it's important that, we identify who's really helped us.
And that is one potential negative side to the technology thing is sometimes those lineages and the need for respective lineages might not get transferred across. Like if somebody watches a video instead of learning a skill from somebody in person. That's right. And so it's been interesting though, because this whole like web of knowledge and all the sharing of thing, I think has been increasing the empowerment level of Indigenous people in holding on to their culture, and in people's awareness that they shouldn't be necessarily sharing parts of Indigenous culture that aren't theirs to be sharing. Yeah. Like there's an increase in that respect needed and the demand for respect, but at the same time, if the lineages of learning are broken, then it can mean that somebody can unintentionally take something that they shouldn't be taking, and there needs to be a lot of knowledge, and that's one of the chapters in here too. Is when you learn something, you need to learn when it's appropriate to immediately share it or when it's not. And there's a lot of levels of that, of Indigenous, something that's sort of owned by a certain culture is really important, songs or ceremonies or that kind of thing. But then there's stuff that is owned by everybody, but also just you need to respect the time it takes to become a skilled enough person to teach it.
Yes.
Like I like to liken it to like taking a yoga class. Like if you take a yoga class, that doesn't mean that you can turn around the next day and teach what you just did to other people, because you could hurt somebody if you do that, because somebody to become skilled at teaching yoga has to undergo hours and hours and hours of training, hundreds of hours of training. And so that's the same with some of our skills. Some of them you can learn and turn around and teach them, and that's how they're meant to be done. Some of them you can learn, but you really are not going to be.
There's an apprenticeship process.
There's an apprenticeship process that needs to happen before you're going to be capable of teaching it well.
Yeah.
Or even
be passed on the stick, so to speak, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where sometimes those delineations can get lost when the transfer of information with our modern technology and
I see that. Yeah.
things are getting shared pretty broadly.
Yeah, that's a really important point that I didn't think about, and I'm glad we're wrapping up on that note.
Right. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that we need to do that.
Yeah.
Need to acknowledge that it isn't just that you learn something and share it immediately. Mm-hmm. Like the skill sharing that term can be a little deceptive that way.
Again, it's a case of timing, mm-hmm. right? You first seek permission, right, and acknowledging those that have come before us and have been our teachers.
That's one of the best rules in everything, is if you acknowledge where you learned things, then you're hopefully not going to be going and doing, like, you're not going to be going astray as easily. Because a lot of times the problem is people not even understanding, like, you feel like your lineages are there, but if you're teaching something that isn't obvious why you have it, then you don't explain your own story, then other people don't understand, like, how you came by your own knowledge, So sharing your stories is huge in all of it.
And I think modern science does this already with sources cited. It's like paying that homage to what has always been, surely in a slightly different sense, but I do see that in a different light now. Used to be like, oh, such a drag. I have to source everything. But now it's like, hey, paying respect, right, to your teachers, right, to your elders, and those who hold the knowledge holders, right?
Oh yeah, and also it's a great way to, when a piece of knowledge has been passed that's maybe incorrect, it's really good to have the sourcing to figure out, like, why it's like,
where did it go wrong?
Well, we can trade, like, we do it with plants all the time. It'll be like, that is completely not right, and we'll source them back and be like, oh yeah. And very often I know a couple sources where they're old sources and people got it totally wrong, and everybody just references them as if it's gospel. And tells people that they can do these certain things with plants that are really untrue. So.
And that's where lives could be saved, mm-hmm. and headaches could be avoided, mm-hmm. and hopefully mistakes can be remediated.
Right, exactly.
That's the hope anyway, right? Furthering along our species for better.
Right.
Speaking of furthering along our species, mm-hmm. Yes. I think one of the most beautiful things I've heard and witnessed you in action is this passing on multiple times a year to young kids and preteens and even sometimes young adults. And I find it to be so beautiful. And I know you and I have talked about it more casually. But yeah, it's like, I'd love for you to spend a few minutes talking about what kind of progression it was for you, and I guess for Stephen at the time.
No, really, the programs were never Stephen. So.
Well,
actually, they were at the very beginning, but it wasn't his gig, so it wasn't.
But you've stuck with it, right? I think the important part to make, and thank you for that clarification, is that you've stuck with it. It's been one of your major offerings, and one in which I know you get a lot out of. But I'm curious to hear how did it start briefly, and how does teaching add to your, I guess, like, inner fulfillment and satisfaction?
A really quick and easy thing is for that question to start is, it's a great segue, is the best way to actually really get to know something is to try to teach it to somebody else. Because you can feel like you've got it. You could have been doing something for a long time. But the minute you try to teach it to somebody else is when you really test yourself. Like, do I really have this? Because can I really, like, because you're doing it. Of course, you know how to do it, but like other people don't quite have maybe the same abilities, different understandings. Like, and sometimes you're doing it and you just by chance it's been working and you don't really know why it's working. And if it doesn't work that easily for that person, you got to figure out why they aren't making the same thing happen. And so it's, that's one of the magics of teaching, is it really solidifies it. And it's a tool I use now. Is I love to people that have been either have already done a program or excelling at something in the program because they have a natural ability. Then it's like, well, go help that person. Like, go help the person that's struggling a little bit with this, because everybody has different things they excel with and different things they struggle with. And so if you take people who are excelling and match them with the people who are struggling and put them into a teaching thing, then it helps everybody. The person, it's like teaching is a huge tool, and it's a huge way of really getting really deep in things. Passing things on is part of that's having knowledge to share is part of it. Yeah. For me, doing the programs was, it was always adults before. Like there were series and it was always adult teaching. Mm-hmm. And that was really what we were doing. And then a sixth grade teacher took one of our programs at Point Reyes. Mm-hmm. And she taught a sixth grade, and it was a string making immersion day. So we were doing string making, net making, tons of stuff. And she was so excited. She wrote me afterwards, and she said, I really want you to come in and make string with my 36th graders in my class.
So this was one of the first times.
This was one of the first times. We had done a few other things where people would say, come and work with these kids, but it wasn't the program that I do now. And Stephen and I had gone into schools, and it was challenging for him to work with children. And, and the way we were doing it, it wasn't structured well for a kid thing. So they were good experiences for the kids, but it wasn't something that we could do regularly.
It's definitely not as refined and shifted as it is now. Yeah.
It was a completely different thing. And so, but learning from those situations, I went into this one, and I had already learned that in those early ones we were trying to do too many complicated things with too many kids at one time, which is a huge thing that is a no-no when you're working with young children. Yes. What I've learned now is you always have to have something everybody can just do. Yep. Because that keeps everybody busy, because as long as you can keep the core class, especially if you've got a class of 30 kids, as long as you can keep the core energy of the class engaged,
keep the
vibe going, everybody's happy, then you can pull 2 or 3 kids at a time and have them do something very complicated. But if you try to do something very complicated with too many kids at one time, like everything just blows up and you lose it all. Mm. And so that's the core of why the program works, is like staying with that key, is never trying to do too many things at one time. So that's what started it, is a sixth grade teacher wanted me to do it. I started coming up with, oh my gosh, 30 kids. How am I going to teach string to 30 kids? Yeah. And I came up with, okay, well, I can teach string to 3 kids at a time.
That's what you used to.
And that's what I still do.
Smaller group, yeah.
Well, no, 3 kids at a time, because it's a triangle. You stand in a triangle. 2 of the kids are holding one end of the twines, each twine. I did see that. And then they hold it. So 3 kids at a time is the group that can make string. I can work with 3 kids at a time making string. What do I do with the other 27 of them? And so we spent months like just throwing things back and forth and coming up with things. And then during that course of time, she said, oh, we're not going to get the funding to do this unless it's the entire 6th grade, which is 5 classes. So all of a sudden, what I thought was going to be 1 class was 5. And it was like, okay, we're going to be doing this. And it was, I did it crazy at the beginning. It was only the mornings. It wasn't the whole day. And we just cranked everybody through. And it was this experience. And it was a huge hit. Everybody loved it. And I have not missed a program with them since that time. Every year we've done 5, like the entire 6th grade class.
Amazing.
And so they were the founding of everything.
I remember it, and I can speak from personal experience, because we did this one class up in Eureka just a couple years ago. I remember, and this is one of the benefits of the craft that I do, which is I'm observing, I'm documenting. I got to see each of those kids' faces light up. And it's like their body language in which they're shown, and something in their minds and their bodies just click, like, oh, this is cool, this is radical, this is amazing, whatever, fill in the adjective. And you can see they're more curious, they lean in.
Yes.
And they engage, right? And they listen, they tune in. Mm-hmm. And sure, some kids are maybe a little distracted or wandering, but they almost always, all of them come back to what's happening, because this is something new, this is something novel.
It's something that taps into like their genetic memory.
Exactly, which I love that you're bringing it up. But we see it, we feel it, right? And I think that's the magic that is often missed, that's often overlooked when we're having these young minds learn other subjects.
And they're not sitting in a classroom. They're not just listening to somebody talk. They're doing experiential education. They're outside in a field. They're running around. They're getting to like move from one thing to the next. They're creating something they're going to take home with their hands. That's a huge part of it, is just opening up those windows of, whoa, I can use my hands to make something. Yeah, and everything, and that's the core of the whole program design, is that every activity always has something that everybody can just do with minimal instruction and that is engaging. And then while that's happening, I'm always taking a few kids at a time and doing more complicated things with them. Yeah. And so it's, so they're really learning a lot, but they're not realizing they're learning a lot. And it actually is a full STEAM or STEM program. Yeah. So it hits on, and that's why the teachers like it so much, is it hits on all the disciplines. So people that don't know that is science, the STEM programs are science, technology, engineering, and math. And then STEAM is the thing you need to add in there, is add arts into it. So it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Yeah. And so it's like, it hits on all of those things. And we're talking about geometry. We're talking about physics. We're talking about,
it's true.
The natural world. We're talking about the earth sciences. And that's the thing I tell the kids always. It's like, your earliest ancestors were the first scientists.
That's right.
We can't exist as humans on this earth without science, without understanding science and applying science. It's like, it's a core part of our existence.
The observation, right, that I just talked about has been like the reason why we have thrived as a species.
Yeah, and we are 100% dependent on technology because of that. That's why science is so critical to our existence, the understanding of it, and it's huge. And so being able to see that we need technology, and trying to go back to the core base technologies. That's what the program is about, the roots of the tree of technology. So you're tracking the technologies. We use the technologies to fulfill the needs in our life. The technological needs are things that aren't just already how they are. So when we use technology, it's just changing something from how it is in the natural world as to how we need it to be for our world or for our use. That's when we're using technologies. And so that tree has been growing up, but we're still fulfilling the same basic needs that we always have. And so in the old days, the roots of the tree technology are the ways that the technologies we use to fulfill those needs, like knowing how to process fibers, knowing how to find sharp tools and make sharp tools, knowing how to transform animal products into useful materials that we can wear or eat or do everything. Yep. So that's the core stuff. And we do modern versions of all of those now, or the same needs are met by different techniques nowadays. But nothing we have in our modern world would exist without our ancestors doing this old stuff.
That's right.
Like if they hadn't figured this stuff out, we wouldn't be here today.
Thank you.
So it's like that's what the program taps in with people. It's like, whoa, this is old stuff, and it's also just really fun.
It is.
You're connecting with the earth. You're sitting on the ground. You're like, even if we're in the middle of a class playing field, we're still like dropping in.
And all the classmates and friends get to hang out outside. Like we did it in this beautiful tree grove on the edge of the school.
Yeah, that's an exceptional school, but yeah.
It is exceptional.
I
mean, let it be known that is an exceptional place, and I hope that school really invests in that in different ways, such as your program, but also like plant trees.
Yeah. Usually it's in the middle of a grassy field, but very often we have trees over underneath. So that's like one of the places I look for some shade. So
shade's nice.
Yeah, and the program has just grown out of that. And so after that first year of running those 5 days, because it went from 1 to being 5. And when I look back at it, it's interesting. We're still doing like 90% of what we did that first year, at least.
So good.
So it like really was a good solid start. There were certain things that got dropped, and there's certain things that have been gotten added over the years.
Refinement too.
Refinement and like basically anything that works that I know the kids can do has stayed, and they've like shown me the best way to have them do an activity.
They're also teaching you in a way.
They're the ones that have created the program.
Yeah.
I just keep it going.
Yeah.
Like
you're the curator.
Yeah, it's their program. That's why it works. So when people are doing it, like, how does this all work? So the kids are all engaged. It's like, yeah, we've been doing this for over 23 years now. The reason everything we do, we know it works because it's here because it works, and the kids have created this program, and I just have to do everything to keep it going and facilitate it.
then I do have to ask, like, what does it mean to you, and in what ways does it really like fulfill that flame that's been burning inside you for so long?
It's, when I first started doing it, I've always been a natural with kids. My mom was a preschool teacher. My sister is an outdoor education teacher.
Oh, is that right?
Like, I've always been good with kids, and we didn't do kids because my ex, Steven, was not good with kids. And so when this was coming into being, it was just happened to be right at the time when he started struggling with a chronic illness with Lyme disease. And we were pulling away from doing the gatherings because he couldn't travel. And so everything around the world, around like our existence and how we were living was shifting. And I was starting to bear the brunt of working and making money because he was just getting sicker and sicker and was really not able to be doing.
Right.
And his illness meant everything we did was stopping because we traveled a lot and we went to events and we just sort of would caretake. And so it meant everything had to shift. And so this came along at a really good time for that. Like, I was trying to figure out how this was going to happen. Yeah. And the school programs were a great way for me of like, this is something that I can do. Right. He can be homesick. I'm going to go do this thing. It's close. It's like, it's not, it's like I've got a commitment trying to do workshops. You can do a ton of work and then you don't get enough people, especially back then. It was hard to tell people about it. And so like, it was a really necessity thing at the beginning, and it was also and then it was really surprisingly inspiring. Like, just the excitement that comes from young kids there's nothing like it at all. Like, it's like they just light up and you're just like, wow, and it's exhausting. Like, the end of the day of teaching kids this stuff, you're just drained, but you feel also like completely charged at the same time. Yeah. So it's like you're physically drained of energy, but your whole soul is just like on fire, and so it's a challenge in that way, making it doable and where it doesn't physically exhaust you too much. But just like everybody is so happy about it, and you just see them on fire, and you get such good feedback from the teachers. So most of the places that I go every year, I go back for the same teachers because I've been going to Strawberry School for 23 years now, and so and it's the centerpiece of the yearbook. Like, there's a whole 2-page spread on the week they spend, and and the kids, like, they come back and do some of the projects they're allowed to do during their recess time and their lunchtime, and it's even when we're there for 3 or 4 days, like 80% of the class will be there on the last day still doing it, and the principals will walk out like, wait, they're not doing their lunch free time? What? This is what they've been doing.
That's what they prefer.
Yeah, they've been doing in class all week. How can they still be engaged? And so, and so that's where it's just super. And you get things back from parents that'll write and say, like, my kid never tells me about school, but what did you do today? Because they just told everybody like 5 times what they did today. And so, those are all really good things. And I'll run into a kid and they'll be like, oh, I made the necklace with you. Like, they remember like 10 years later, So it's really rewarding work. It's exhausting work, but it's rewarding work.
Truly. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And it's, and I really enjoy doing it. It's, and it's really been spreading and growing, and I haven't done any advertising. It's all word of mouth. Like, teachers, a couple years ago, I looked back, I was like, how many of the programs I do now came from Strawberry School? And it's at least like 75% of them, because it was like a teacher would leave Strawberry and go teach at another school. Like, of course you got to come to our school now. And then somebody would leave that school and go to another school. Of course you got to go here now. The principal would go become a principal of another school.
When people go out of their way to recommend you and vouch, and also like they're looking out for you, right? It's like you really get the biggest pat on the back when you're like that deeply validated by people's actions following, the comments you get from the parents, the reactions, even without words, that you see from the kids.
Oh yeah,
right? How activated they are. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm very glad that I got to see just a sliver.
Of what it is.
Please continue on. Yeah, it's just such a shining light.
Oh, it is. People love it, and we get such good feedback, and having to stop because of COVID and then trying to take things online. And this year is the year we've really come back and are reconnecting with the schools that sort of got dropped during COVID for different reasons. It's like, and a couple of those schools that are starting again this year in person are just like, we've missed you so much. Like, so it's been really sweet. And then even with the addition that came during COVID was adding a whole teaching kit, which we had to do to remote learning, and now it's an option. And several of the schools, they did the kits during and just post-COVID because I was requiring it. Like, I'm not going to do this without the kits because we have to do all this distancing and everything. But then I made it an option last year, and most of the schools opted out because it does cost a lot more money because putting the kits together is a ton of time and resources, right?
Yeah.
And so they were like, no, we don't have it in our budget. And 2 of those schools this year who had used the kits during COVID opted out last year. This year, they're like, no, we want the kits. We realize how valuable they are.
Exactly.
Like, because it's such an amazing experience, and the kits allows the kids to continue after we're gone. It's not just a one-day blip. The kits give them the ability to make 4 more necklaces, and they get the tools. They can find more materials. They get really inspired. So it's been really a validation that 2 schools have been like, oh no, we're definitely going to find the budgeting for this. We got to find new grants or whatever. But yeah,
Up high.
yeah.
High five.
So all the work that has
I'm
gone
stoked
into
for you.
those kits is not just a passing thing either.
Yeah. And this is where, gosh, I want to maybe just take a moment and say, this is where, if there was a Venn diagram of interests, skill sets, what's valuable to you and those that you work with, what's valuable and enlightening to those that you come in contact with, and creates an income and fulfillment. Wow, it's like, we're talking 5, 6
Oh, yeah.
Venn diagrams
Yeah,
all
definitely.
overlapping, going like, this is it. This is like the golden.
Yeah, and if I hadn't figured out how to do these school programs, I don't think I would have been able to make this place happen either.
Yeah.
Because it was the thing that allowed my income to become regular enough.
Yeah, very few people can say that
and-
they do this full on. It's I think the conundrum of the modern day life. It's difficult, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's very difficult to uphold a life where you're living your values and there's very little bending or compromise. That's the word I'm looking for.
Right.
Because you're living out your full, vibrant. Yeah.
Trying at least, and having the opportunity to.
Hey,
for
from
sure,
where I'm sitting and from where I'm looking, each time I come through, I'm just like, yep, they're doing it. She's doing it.
We're building on it.
Yeah.
It's slow progress sometimes, but it's always moving forward, and just being here on the land is, and then the restoration ground we're doing right now is feels key. It feels so good.
It feels so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys were, your eyes were lit up when you were telling me over dinner last night. And I was like, wait, what? You're getting paid to do?
Yeah.
And the funding comes from, okay, all right. I know that feeling. It's like, I remember in the last couple weeks, because I've been meeting so many new people, the folks that I've been able to come across on the road and most recently at Burning Man, we really want to get to know each other on a personal level. We have our devices down and there's a lot of time and space. And yeah, I've often caught myself just pinching myself, literally and figuratively, going like, yeah, people seem to like what I offer. And I get paid and am asked to drive and fly and train around the world to take the train, not train, different train, to take pictures and to capture their memories, their future throwbacks will be thanks to the fact that I really like what I do.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
they find value in it. So I can apply that to your offerings and other people that I see that live just an mostly uncompromised and value-driven life.
We're trying. We're doing the best we can in our modern world with the challenges
It's
that
tricky.
we have. It's tricky, but I think that's why people are attracted to you, is you understand that, and you see the things that people are doing, through maybe where other people wouldn't see it. And so that's, you have a skill you're bringing to it, but you also have a way of interacting with people that makes them feel comfortable and inviting you in, and it's because it's a personal thing to have somebody document you.
It's very personal.
It's you're doing a great job, and that's why it's coming together like that, I think.
And I hope
It's
that
awesome.
in talking about this, right, this is for me to get to know you better, and it has already, for you to bring forth these really fond memories, blast from the past, right?
Oh yeah.
Through the decades, and again, acknowledging all the teachers, which I'm very thankful for. I'm thankful for them that your paths have crossed, and that they've given you the inspiration and the knowledge transfer, and it's made me think about a lot of people that have informally and formally taught me through the years that I may not at the time realize that they're my teachers, but looking back, I go, oh, that was really a pivotal moment.
Yeah, they're in your lineage for sure.
Sometimes the spark doesn't come till later. We often want the instant gratification, and it's like, oh, did that happen then? Oh, no. But sometimes you think
the seed was planted.
The seed was planted, exactly. When does it sprout? We don't know. But when it's fertile and the conditions are right, correct? And this is the same thing, right? Like all of those kids from as young as I think second, third grade.
Third grade. Well, there's been a few kindergartners in there in multi-grade classes, but usually a full class is the youngest is third grade.
Yeah, right. Up to I think middle high school.
An adult.
An adult too.
Yeah.
It's like we don't know, and we can't place an expectation necessarily on it. That would be kind of I think foolish. But truly, it's like we just got to know that we're doing as best as we can to those that are willing to absorb and take in the information, and it's like just let that be it. Allow the waves and the flow of life to just take it and see when those seeds could sprout.
Exactly, and for me is like one of the biggest things about the kids is even if they don't start doing the skills per se, I feel like the program opens their eyes a little bit to other ways that people live. Like there's a lot of little subtle lessons in there that they don't even realize they're learning. One of the things I say is, everybody doesn't live exactly how we live right now, right here in the world. Like there's a lot of different ways that people live, because we're talking about hunting and gathering and farming and industrial society. We're comparing those, but it's also just everybody in the world lives one of these three or a combination of the three. Like it's not, everybody doesn't live in the industrial society. Everybody doesn't live in a farming thing. And we live at a time now where we can choose which one of those we want to live in and what we want to pull from the past. So I feel like it opens the window to people.
It does.
Or opens the people's eyes. And Jim Riggs, one of my mentors, I remember he used to say something along the lines of best compliment that a student of mine can give me is to outdo me, to take something I taught to them and blow me out of the water, and some people feel like competitive, or if they feel but I feel the same way. It's like, and so I showed you the books last night of Wonia is one of, she took her first tanning class from me when she was 19. And admittedly, it was a rainy day with no shelter, and the hides didn't come out that great, but it was her first experience of doing this. And she then went and tanned with a bunch of other people, and, by the time we saw her a year later, she was this amazing tanner and bedecked in beautiful buckskin, and she's outdone me at every level possible over the years, and she's like a great friend of mine. And we tend to run and we just have become really good colleagues and everything. And, and I'm super proud of her for what she's done on The Alone Show, and with her book, Never Alone, is really fun to read. Those kinds of mentee things. And I wrote the foreword to her buckskin book that's going to be coming out. And, and I really we're doing a reprint of the buckskin book, and I'm hoping she might not necessarily write a whole foreword, but I'm hoping to have her write a little thing in, because it's, it would be great to have Jim Riggs as one of my mentors, and then to have her, who's taken out running, writing a little thing in there too. So, it's all the generations, bringing it all through.
It really is, yeah.
And figuring it all out, because we're really fortunate. Like you were flipping through the Spirit Weavers book and just going oohing and awing, right?
Yeah.
And and these experiences, these week-long or 2-week-long skills gatherings, or gatherings of any sort of bringing people together, are like what you were talking about from Burning Man, right? It's one of the reasons I've never felt such a draw to go to Burning Man, is I go to numerous of these skills gatherings every year.
Almost always
right?
similar.
And they're a very similar energy, but very small. so I prefer the small. So the small population. And but that's the thing is I came to a big realization is going to these events, like for these people that go to Spirit Weavers and for the people that attend the skills gatherings, the majority of the people go to one a year, and they go every year. And it is the thing they bring their kids to. They raise their kids in the gatherings, because it's a community.
It's a reunion.
It's a reunion. It's a village of people that are brought together. But because I'm a skills teacher, I have had the amazing luxury for the past 20 plus years of going to multiple of these guys every year. And so I've realized, like, especially since COVID, I've now not gone to gatherings for a couple of years, and it's fine to take a break. I've gone to so many. And in the years right before COVID, I was going to like 8 a year, you know. I was like hitting the max of so many a year. And because you can actually just spend your entire existence on the road going from gathering to gathering.
Yes, I get it.
But I have realized, like, for so many people that like 1 week a year is like the dream. And I that village living thing is as much a part of my reality as the living here.
That's right.
You know, and then like, and it's pretty amazing, and I feel really blessed to have been able to spend so many hours and so many days of my life, like so many nights sleeping in a tent, so many nights sleeping in a community setting where people are drumming around the campfire as I go to sleep. You know, like
Nothing
like when I add up all of those days and all of those events and all of those nights, it's a large portion of my existence. You know, and so it's a wonderul experience, and I highly recommend them to everybody. Try to go at least one a year if you can. You know, they're all over the place, but they are transformative, and they're open to everybody. They're something that it's as much about getting the village community feel as learning the skills. You know, and you can see that in the Spirit Weaver's book.
Oh,
it's
I
like,
feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
even without reading the words last night and being a photographer myself, I really appreciated every aspect of it. You know, the feeling that I had was beyond words. And once I did read some of the words, it just added even more depth. Right. Added more context. Just like we are now, right? The conversation we've just had in the last hour and a half or so has added even more depth and color and vibrancy and additional appreciation for those that have come before you, those who are still here, and those who are sprouting up and becoming a new strong tree on their own.
Absolutely.
Right? It's a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Yeah, and I showed them to you last night just as a closing on those kinds of things. Is you know, when Monia's memoir, The Number Alone, came out this year, just within a couple months before that, another really good friend of mine's, Lynx Vilden's memoir came out, and she was the one that I referred to back in the Stone Age living skills events. Mm-hmm. So she's now written her memoir, which is called Return, which is all about her experience of teaching groups of people to just be out with just stone tools, which she's the one that's taken, the one of all of us that's taken that to the furthest degree. Like, we all encourage the use of stone tools, but to go out with no metal tools is a different deal. Yeah. And so, and she's really, you know, and again, her evolution of learning how to teach those, it all came down, it was way easier to teach the skills than it was to figure out how to live in community together. So the thing that was the biggest challenge on those trips has always been human interaction. Because we thought the skills was going to be the biggest challenge, but it's the social.
The skills is more linear.
It's more linear, and once you learn it, you can learn it. But the social dynamic is always there and always changing. And so it's very interesting, and she talks about that in her book. And then, you know, along the lines of, one of the best things about these gatherings is there's huge gangs of youth running around, and there's structured programs, but there's also tons of youth running around, and people will freak out. They'll come to a skills gathering, and there's a 7 or 8 year old boy running around with a huge knife on his belt. And people are like, no, they can't have sharp blades. They're too young. And it's like, no, if the rules at the gatherings is that if the parents feel that the child is safe with the blade,
correct,
they're allowed to have it. But the understanding is that they can be instructed and reprimanded by any adult if any kind of unsafe behavior is ever being seen, and reprimanded and corrected and coaxed and whatever you want to say. Like, if they're doing something dangerous, their knife can get taken away.
Yeah. Well, this is a beautiful showcase of, hey, like, you're empowered to a certain degree.
Right.
And with that, there is an element of responsibility.
The community is keeping track of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know. And so people will freak out, like, you know, oh, the little kids with sharp knives. Like, well, yeah, as long as they're doing it safe. Yes, exactly. And so, and very seldom does anybody get a knife taken away. Correct. Like, it's really, really rare.
That's the culture that's embedded in those places, right? Mm-hmm. That you come in there and if you come in there with an open mind and open heart, that's possible. And also, like, there's lessons to be gained for the adult to be like, well, what you deem as dangerous is also a preconditioning that you've gained from whatever your childhood.
And thinking that children can't deal with sharp edges, like, because they know how to deal with sharp edges, they can learn.
Yeah, I've been sitting with the question of like, oh, is this a bias or a condition that I grew up with that I'm now trying to undo? And oftentimes it is.
Yeah, like that. And that's basically what, with the unschooling thing that you were talking about. And then my friend Jessica Cruz Crafts Wild book, like allowing youth and children to grow up without the conditioning that we grew up with, and allowing them to be natural wild children. And a lot of that is just being out in nature. It gives a lot of good teachers and giving people a chance, and not telling them they can't do, like if they have an interest, letting them do, with guidelines and with keeping them safe and stuff. But it's amazing what young people, it's amazing in the natural world how young people pretty quickly know what's dangerous and what's not. And it's not that they're oblivious, because they can pick things up. If they're given the chance, they can do really well. And the guidance.
Yeah.
And given the chance to be themselves. And that's what a lot of the rewilding stuff is, and the unschooling. And, and so the gatherings have been a really great testing grounds. And even if they don't, some of the people that come to the gatherings, their children live that way the entire year. The majority of the people that come to the gatherings, that time at the gathering is the only way they really are given that freedom. They live in an apartment in town the rest of the time. I think it affects them well, no matter what. Like, it gives them an independence, and it gives them an assessing and an understanding.
A purpose, too.
A purpose, and like a sense of self-responsibility. Mm-hmm. A sense of self-empowerment.
100%. I'm so with you.
And watching all those kids grow up all these years has been just an amazing thing. So
I love for you to come back to a close, and this is definitely related, which is maybe what words you may have for young parents who have just brought new lives into this planet, and also maybe aspiring parents. What words of wisdom do you have for them, especially through what you've done?
I would say encourage your kids to use their hands. Just encourage them to get in the dirt, to do things, to walk around, to like put their hands on things, to experience, like get personal experience and personal connection, as much as possible. Like being out in the natural world, understanding animals, respecting it, that's another level that you can keep going in with it, that you can take that to whatever level you want going in there. But just physically doing things with your hands, even if you're not out in the natural world, is huge. Just encouraging creativity and creation. Like we became modern humans because the two tools we're born with are our brain and our hands. Our hands have the ability to change things and alter them, but they would be worthless without our ideas that we have. And people think that those two things co-evolve together. So the more our hands could do, the more our brain developed and got more ideas. And there was a long evolution of co-development between the two. And that is what children have a natural drawing to. We as humans are drawn to use our hands to create and change things. It's just part of our hardwiring. And the more that is encouraged from a younger age, the more defined and the stronger that wiring becomes. And it develops, I think it develops kids' brains to be more intelligent, because the more you use your hands, the more your brain just like starts firing all those things. And it's just like it's the most important thing is to teach kids to use their hands. Because when I run into kids in 6th grade who don't know how to use their hands to do anything, it's really difficult. And it's sort of like, you
start at a low level. Yeah. But but because they're malleable,
they still can figure things out, but the younger they learn it, the better. The more and it's not even just learning anything, it's just letting them play so that they twist. Like some kids, I've run into like 4th and 5th grade kids that don't know how to twist their hands. They don't know how to take their hand and twist it. Like they've never done that motion, which is so core to our existence, right? They can take their thumb and move it around like crazy, but they can't actually do a twist. And so it's all about physical development. Our hand has to get, have to get developed.
Hand-eye coordination.
But then the use of our hands develops our brain
Yeah.
and keeps us healthy and keeps us connected.
Yeah. Let's see how that lands.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for this time and just telling me and folks who are listening, a little piece of your inner world.
Thanks for taking the time, for sure. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Gosh, I so enjoyed listening through and editing this podcast, this conversation together. It's even though it's been about 1.5 years since it was recorded, it feels that the teachings and the wisdom that's talked about here is timeless. It just really embodies who I know Tamara to be.
It's worth mentioning that Spirit Weavers is a women's only gathering.
And Tamara's website is Paleotechnics.com. So that's spelled Paleo Technics, Technics.com. You can find out about her biography and ways to get her publications and see what programs and workshops and other offerings are available.
The numerous skills gatherings mentioned in our conversation are linked on the skills gatherings page on her website.
Tamara also runs a Patreon just like I do and is loosely on social media. Best way to get in touch would be through these avenues. If something in this show really resonated with you and you'd like to ask me questions, please feel free to reach out. I can be reached on Wilderness Within Pod on Instagram. Drop me a line. Love to hear from you. And thank you so much for your time and listening. And a special shout out to all the Patreon supporters through the years in making this show possible. The equipment, the time, and just having your financial, mental, spiritual support through the years has been so invaluable. So lots of love to you all out there who have supported past, present, and future. All right, with that said, I am out and just so happy, so joyed that I'm able to come back on the editing train and produce a new episode. I look forward to going through the archives with a dozen or so recorded conversations I have between 2022 and 23, and I hope to produce them, not with a 10-month gap. Thanks for your patience, and thank you for your time again. Cheers.